Good evening. Here we are in New York City, and we're ready to present to you tonight the West Coast launch for Robert Duncan's debut novel, Loudmouth. Here it is. Here's the brand new copy, hot off the press and just into the bookstores. The pub date is today. Count the day. It's October 6th, and that is the pub date for Loudmouth. And we're selling today through Green Apple Books, which is in San Francisco on Clement Street, 506. And that's out in the Richmond district. I think they have another store in on the other side in the Sunset, but you could go to either store and order the book and see below this little ticker. You can get the book from right there. So thanks, Green Apple, for co-sponsoring this with us. We are Three Rooms Press, and I'm Peter Karloftis, and we're going to be presenting the West Coast launch for Robert Duncan's debut novel, Loudmouth. So now, right now, we're going to have Kat Georgia. She's in the other room, my partner. She's going to be presenting the trailer, the brand new trailer, hot off the video press for the debut novel of Robert Duncan, Loudmouth. So here's Loudmouth trailer. Let's welcome Kat for a second, and then we're going to bring up. Hey, Kat, how are you?
Okay, good. Here we go. Ready?
You're going to be in here with me pretty soon, but right now we're going to see.
All right, let's go. Let's do this.
At a time of strife, let us look back at a time of innocence, of sex, drugs, rock and roll, attempted murder, bad faith, and very bad driving. The Clash, Stones, Springsteen, Cream Magazine, New York, Detroit, Memphis, and Buck Teeth. Loudmouth, the debut novel by Robert Duncan.
All right.
Now, is that exciting or what? Tell me that isn't exciting. All right, Kat, we're going to bring you back in here. She's going to come join me right now. And in the interim, I'll take over and I'll be talking for a second about Loudmouth. Robert Duncan. He's got a great novel, just came out, his first novel, and you should buy it right now. See that ticker at the bottom? Buy it from Green Apple Books out there in the on Clement Street in San Francisco, or any indie bookstore in any town you're in. You can also order from us, Three Rooms Press. Here we are, or Amazon. It's a great, fun novel about learning to live through rock and roll. So becoming yourself through rock and roll at the time when that was possible, when that became what you could be. Here comes Kat. On Clement. Here's Kat. So Kat Georges is joining me. We're the partners, the co-founders and co-directors of
Three Rooms
Press. Yay!
All right. Well, let's.
At this point, we are going to bring up the author.
The author, Robert Duncan.
Here he comes. Robert Duncan, join us.
Hey, Robert. It's so nice.
Well, hello, guys.
Congratulations.
Hello, New York City. We're out here in California.
Congratulations, the official launch of Loudmouth.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very excited. Thank you for putting it out.
Yeah,
it's a great thing, and working it over and making it readable.
Yes, it's a hot book. It's great.
We're following our dreams, helping, putting books out into the world and keeping, the bar held high, which is what you've done too. So tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, let me just say thanks to Green Apple Books, which is one of my favorite bookstores in the world. It's a great place. Go to Green Apple when they're open, or go online.
Right there at the bottom of your screen, you can see that little ticker.
Yeah, you can get a hold of Green Apple, Loudmouth from Green Apple tonight by buying it from this link. We made it simple: bit.ly/Loudmouth Green Apple Books. So
you can also click on this right here on your comments, and you can go right to the page and order the book. So this is one of the comments right here. Look for this comment on the comment side, and you will. Here it is again. So just go to that link and you can press on it and get the book. So, Bob, why don't you read the intro there, Robert?
Oh, my God. All right. I'm going to read you the intro. So that means I have to take off my medically indicated shades and put on my medically indicated cheaters.
Either way.
All right. This is the intro of the book, and it's chapter 0 of all things.
We're going to put you on solo. So
all right,
take it away, and we'll be right back.
All right. It's chapter 0, and the title is Cuyahoga, and it's really short. If it takes me more than 2 minutes to read this, so yeah, it's no time for a bathroom break. Towing a long black veil of unabashedly leaded exhaust, the fair lane swung by Swingos, Cleveland's famous for calling itself famous Celebrity Inn, and we climbed in. Me shotgun, Bruce in back, Bruce when he was scrawny and wispy-bearded, hanging over the front seat like a boy in a Bruce song. My friend Charlie, slouching in the driver's, was here to show us the sights. A dive bar Charlie liked. A dive bar his band played before they threw him out for being drunk all the time. A dive bar next to a radio station. Alan Freed, Charlie tossed out by way of history lesson as we rattled past. A dive bar Charlie liked to hang by the record store he liked to hang, and here he snatched his fingers from the wheel to count down the righteousness within. Eiler, Ornette, the Five, Stooges, before plugging another Camel in rubber band lips, another homemade cassette in the dash, and drifting into focus and out. It had started with a handwritten note on a pink square of paper, "While you were out," printed in black at the top. On the message line, it had said, "Come to Cleveland." In the from space, the raspy-voiced caller had asked the receptionist to write B.S. But even a short-term temp from Squaresville knew what those initials stood for a week after simultaneous covers of Time and Newsweek. I couldn't help but wonder if the invitation was actually the ploy of a manager who used to be a critic, trying to make sure all the contrarians, and our magazine was a hotbed of them, had come aboard. "Hey, Bruce," I could hear him saying, "why don't you invite that cream kid to the Cleveland show?" Maybe I'd gone cynical, a credulous Midwesterner curdled at 22 by too long in New York. Or maybe Bruce, a credulous kid from the Midwest of the East Coast, wide-eyeing the towers across the river, actually thought he'd found someone who knew the feeling. I don't doubt a bond was forming. We'd shared a few adventures in Detroit and New Orleans, and the couple times we'd run into each other in New York, good feelings seemed to be mutual and genuine. So let's just agree that the come to Cleveland summons was all Bruce, spontaneous and real, and even, beneath the characteristic offstage reserve, wildly exuberant. Either way, the guy was enough of a star that enough of a starfucker went. Called Bruce back. Said I'd get my friend Charlie to show us the real Cleveland. He would love Charlie. Cleveland born and raised, Charlie was a poet, songwriter, out-of-tune guitar basher, squiggly-voiced singer, Lou Reed apostle, pal of Lester Bangs, implacable evangelist in the columns of Cream for all sorts of rock insurgencies. Pill popper, syrup sucker, booze hound, bad dancer, blood donor, world's most skeletal life model, mama's boy, and nothing if not a bird, which I explained is what my father called people he didn't know where to file. Like me. Probably like you, Bruce. Charlie was also a sweetheart, and through a long, perfectly odd, and perfect afternoon, he swerved his wobbly junker all over Cleveland's crumbly streets and pockmarked highways until I thought it might fly off its springs. He slowed down, sped up, scraped off his last hubcap and kept going, screeched to a halt, and after roaring back into freeway traffic, dove under the dash for a dropped cig, missed the exit, and backed up on the shoulder, abruptly leaning across the front seat to flip open the glove compartment. A pistol fell out. And with not a shit or fuck from Charlie, who kept scratching around, scattering gum wrappers, crumpled camel packs, band flyers, parking tickets, expired registrations, and assorted detritus of an outmatched attempt at citizenship. Until finally, with bony fingers and long, dirty nails, he extracted 3 .45 caliber bullets. He gave one to Bruce, one to me, and held one for ceremony in the palm of his tremulous hand. And then, I'll never forget, Charlie from Cleveland said to me and Bruce, "This is how we'll remember."
All right,
That's
Bob, very
cool.
good. So you were one of the main editors of Cream magazine back in the day, in the mid late '70s, right?
I was the managing editor, in the mid-'70s.
What year did you begin with Cream?
Well, I started freelancing for him in '74, and I went there. I got hired to be the low man on the totem pole, the copy boy. What's that?
What city was this?
This is in Cream is always in the kind of greater Detroit area, but at this point it was in Birmingham, Michigan.
Really? Okay.
I'm blinded by my own. I dropped a light in my eyeball the other day. It was Birmingham, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. It's not whatever. It's 13 miles away. I think it's near 13 Mile on
So you
Woodward
started
Avenue.
in Detroit with Cream, and then you moved to New York, or was that the next move, or where did you go from there?
Well, you know what? Me personally, I made this a novel so I wouldn't have to recount all the different places I moved to.
Okay.
But I started out I was born in the Midwest, but I kind of grew up from 4th grade on in New York. So I really was attached to New York, felt it was my home. But I was trying to be first I was trying to be a rock singer for many years. And finally, I decided I had to do something that I could do on my own that didn't have to depend on exploding drummers or wayward bassists or whatever. So I decided I'd be a writer. And at some point, I met, wonderful serendipity. I met a couple of guys who helped me out, and one of them was John Morthland, great writer, great musicologist, and he hired me to be the copy. He called me in New York and said, "Hey, I need a copy boy here." He was the editor at the time. He was the temporary editor because John never liked a permanent job. And he said, "You want to be copy boy?" And I'm like, and I'm sleeping on my friend's cat infested couch. And I'm like, and I'm just completely broke. And I'm like, yeah, I definitely want to be copy boy, it was a paying job. So
and then a couple of years later, as you just read, you're running around Detroit with Bruce Springsteen.
Well, that was in Cleveland. But what happened? I worked with Lester Bangs, the noted rock critic. He became my great friend, and he was my coworker in Detroit. And Lester he was a brilliant writer, genius, mad genius. You have to throw the mad in there. But he after Dave Marsh left, he was the original editor, and then John Morthland came in as an interim editor. They went through a series of other editors, and Lester would, to my observation, he would drive them away. Eventually, they'd just be like, "Well, fuck this. I can't, trying to manage Lester Bangs was too much."
Right.
And so eventually, it wasn't long before they got to the copy boy. And the publisher said to me one night, he said, "Hey, you want to ride home?" I'm like, "All right." Never offered me a ride home before. I went down and got his, fancy Barry Kramer, got his fancy Lincoln. I think he had a Lincoln Continental. And he's like, "Hey, let me say something to you." Because I had revealed that I was a character, and I was a loudmouth, like my character in the book. And I was up for I was a cheerleader. And he said, how would you feel about being editor of the magazine? And I'm like, holy shit, all right. I said, I tell you what, he says, because, it's just not working out with anybody else. And I said, all right, well, and by the way, I'm 21 years old. I too I'm a genius, because I said to Barry Kramer, I said, if you gave me the title editor, Lester he would always be picking at me. And I said, why don't you make Lester the editor, but it's just a titular thing, and you make me managing editor, and I'll manage things. And Lester won't have to worry about that, but Lester's got his honorary title, and the title he deserved, because he was definitely the heart and soul of the magazine at that point. And so Kramer did that, made me managing editor, Lester editor, and it fucking worked like a charm. It worked like a charm. Okay.
Hilarious.
It was a 21-year-old organizational genius.
Wow.
How did Philip Seymour Hoffman do playing Lester? You think he got him at all, or? I
thought he was great. In Almost Famous, Philip Seymour Hoffman plays him. And his and it was pretty. It was very evocative of Lester. And
that's good. He was a great actor.
He was a great actor. We miss him.
Well, listen, what we want to do is bring up your dear friend in San Diego. So I want you to introduce him, Gary Wilson, and we will talk to him for a minute, and then you guys will be able to riff on some past, and then we'll be back along to maybe throw in a few questions from the audience or move things along. We'll see. So let's bring up Gary. But why don't you introduce him first? So tell the audience.
Wow, I'm so excited to have the wonderful Gary Wilson, who has become my friend. But initially, I was a fan, and I had a friend who he doesn't tour that much. Gary tours a little bit more now. But he was coming to San Francisco. And so my friend DJ Steph, the late, great DJ Steph, who we all loved, and she knew everybody in the music business, and died too young, died suddenly of a heart thing. And we worked together too, DJ Steph and I. Anyway, she says, well, I know Gary and I know his manager. I'll take you down and introduce you. So we went down, saw his show. His show is, if you ever get a chance, which you will, not, I wish tonight, but we can't do it because of noise. Gary's building won't let him make a lot of noise in the building, so that's the unfortunately. But his show is fantastic. It's great music that's very strange, and it is but it's at the same time it's almost like childlike, and he has a whole cosmos of characters, Linda and Mary and all these women who almost universally reject him or have somehow betrayed him, and but it's all kind of it's kind of a preteen emotional outlet. It's great. So check out Gary has a new record out right now, and he's the great.
Yeah,
I can't wait to meet him.
Gary.
The experimental musician and performance artist, Gary Wilson. Welcome.
Hey, Gary.
Yay. Let me tell you one more thing about Gary. Gary is a few years back, Gary his musical career had gone quiet, and he had done a record in 1977 he was playing in New York City, and he did a record, one record, and then for many years nothing happened, as happens in the arts. You're a writer. This is my first book in 30 years, so I could fully understand. And but Gary had this record, and somehow it got into the record collectors network, and it got to Beck, and then Beck, in the song Where It's At, two turntables and a microphone, he said, my man, he shouted out Gary, he said, my man Gary Wilson, he rocks the most. And of course,
can you verify this, Gary?
Yeah. That's a good story there, Robert. Yeah.
We're so happy to have you. Anybody who got into John Cage's world at age 14 is welcome on our live stream anytime. So,
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
the sorry, that shout out wound up as a documentary filmmaker came and found Gary, and they did a wonderful documentary called "You Think You Really Know Me," and it premiered at Lincoln Center in New York, and it's you can get it on Netflix and stuff. It's great. So that's Gary. I'll shut up.
all right, here's Gary.
yeah. Well, hello there, everyone. Yeah, well, the story, of course, we know the whole story of where it all came from, and I got to see the Beatles, and when I was actually my first hero was Dion, and the Belmonts, and Bobby Rydell, and Fabian, and a lot of those teen idols, which probably reflect in my music nowadays. I think about it. Maybe I continued with the modern day Dion or the modern day Fabian, so to speak. But anyway, yeah. So, we're talking now in the early 60s, of course. And then the Beatles came about, and I said, nah, I'm going to stay with Dion and the Belmonts. But then I became a Beatle fan and went to see the Beatles when I was 12. And then started my first band when I was 13. And it's a funny thing, Cleopatra Records, they've released my last 6 albums, I guess. They re-released my 1967 record that I put out with my first band, Lord Fuzz. I thought that was kind of
when you
cool.
were how old?
Well, I was 13
You were like
13 when I made the record. 1967. It was a good year for music.
Amazing.
You had all the people, Hendrix and the psychedelic people from California, and we were a good band. We were like these. I look back at it now and I'm thinking, and I was playing Farfisa organ with the band, and I don't know how at 13 I stood up enough to actually play, but our parents would take us to the gigs, but I played with the school orchestra, so I was into, chamber music and orchestra music, and that's what led me to John Cage, actually, and I got into experimental art, experimental theater, experimental. For a while, I was a painter when I was a teenager, and that was a good era. It was all leading up to You Think You Really Know Me, and the shows I would, going back to when I was a painter, and I'm talking when I was 14 or 15. I would paint these like 7 foot by 7 foot. I'd get these big, huge sheets of wood and plaster on like chairs and inner tubes and tires and flour and hay, and make these like sculptures and throw red paint and make them real. And I would get
Robert Rauschenberg style.
Exactly. He was my hero at the time.
Yeah, he's my hero too.
Yeah. So it was like interesting as I developed, because I would get into these big art shows, like the New York State Art Show, where all these artists from all over New York State would come into the arena, and this is, like I'm saying, it was a learning process for me. I was building up to You Think You Really Know Me, but I was still in 1969 or 68 or 70. But I learned then that because I would watch like people go by some beautiful art and modern abstract art also, but they would come to my art, and then they would stand and look at it, and I would have like prices like $100,000 or $80,000, and nobody would buy my stuff, but they would stand there for about 4 minutes, and I would catch their attention, and I thought, okay, so this is what I'm trying to say. It was all building up to 1977. Plus, I was playing, like I say, with the. I mean, my biggest thing, let's face it, meeting John, being invited by John Cage to his house and sitting with him, and him going over my music, one-on-one at his house in Haverstraw, New York. And
you're from New York, right? Gary, you're from upstate New York? Hey, he's still there. You're from upstate New York, right?
Yeah, I was from Endicott, upstate, near Binghamton, Syracuse.
Binghamton, yes. The book is Loudmouth. Now, you guys spent a lot of time in New York. Is that where you met in New York?
No. We met out here. But the funny thing is, I started, and I gave a lot of these attributes to the protagonist in the book, in Loudmouth, Thomas Ransom. He starts playing in a band as I did at 12, like Gary did. Gary mentioned Bobby Rydell. The first two singles I ever bought were Leslie Gore and Bobby Rydell, Forget Him.
Hey,
Remember
Bob,
Forget Him?
Hey,
Yeah.
Robert, there's a good story. You talk Bobby Rydell. I posted a picture. My mother used to curl my hair when I was like in fifth grade. I was trying to look like Dion and Bobby Rydell. And so I posted a picture when I was like 10 years old, or 9 or 10. And guess who responded? And this was in Twitter. Bobby Rydell. I said,
"You're kidding me."
Oh
my God.
Yeah, it was like, I said in the first post, I said, my mom used to curl my hair to look like Bobby Rydell and Dion and Frankie Avalon. And then lo and behold, Bobby Rydell responds. He goes, "You got it, Gary. You got that look." And I'm like,
man.
Yeah, it was.
That must have sent you over the moon.
Oh, it did. It was a real treat. I mean, it was like, wow.
I look back on that record. I don't want to get too much into record collect, but I look back on that record, that song now, Forget Him, and I think, that kind of sucked. But Leslie Gore, I was right about Leslie Gore. You Don't Own Me was a great song.
It was. And I went to see Leslie Gore in New York.
Yeah.
And she was playing at, I don't know, it was probably 1972 or something.
Yeah.
After the 60s.
Yeah.
I can't, and
Reno Sweeney, maybe.
It could have been. It was like some cabaret type of a place. And,
Reno Sweeney. I bet you. I saw Nico there.
Yeah.
But, and the other thing is, you talked about seeing the Beatles. I saw the Beatles, as did my protagonist. I saw the Beatles at Shea Stadium it was the second to last gig they ever did, live gig. It was 1966. And my good friend, it was all sold out, I guess. And his father was kind of, Irish mafia, let's call him. And he got us admission to the press seats at the Beatles in Shea Stadium. And funny thing is, there was no press there. We were the only people in there, me and my friend, and our two first dates. Our first dates, who didn't seem impressed enough that we were taking them to the Beatles. It was like, what? And but anyway, so we were alone in the press box because the press didn't deign to cover the Beatles, pop shit. There was no pop, there was no pop reporter at the time.
Yeah. I went to the 1965 show.
Oh, shut up! You had to get one on me, didn't you?
You both got to see the Beatles. What about a decade later? You were both in New York at the time, right? During that punk era coming to life, but you guys never hung out then, huh?
We didn't meet till I don't know, 20 years, more than 20 years later.
But you were both.
But we were both. I was going, I came back from, I worked at Cream for like only a year and a half. It's amazing that its influence in my life has sustained for many decades. And, but so I came back to New York, and, which I felt was kind of my home anyways. And I used to go down to CBGB's, and it was the early days. And I remember one time going down, I don't even know if I was going to see the band specifically, but I went down to see what was going on, and I like to drink, and so I would go down and get some beer and see what was going on. And it was this trio were playing in the corner. It was before they'd moved the stage further back in the place, so it was pretty funky. The stage was about a foot off the ground, and I sat in the back next to a guy named Tom Verlaine, who was the leader and songwriter of the band Television, and the band that was playing was this trio called Talking Heads, and it was before they became a quartet with Jerry Harrison. And I was like, all right, okay, these nerd guys, because it was like that was kind of their shtick. They were nerds, and And anyways, kind of cool to see Talking Heads. And there was maybe 5 people in the place. It was just, and one of them was Tom Verlaine. So
I remember Tom, sure. And my favorite group at that time was the Sick Fucks. I love those guys.
Oh, I remember this. I knew Russell Walensky was in the Sick Fucks.
Sure. We have Valerie Hersey. Robert says, "Hi, happy Loudmouth release day." So,
Yay.
do you know Val? Do you know Val?
The name rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you. Yes, I know Val. She's the greatest person on earth. She's the only person better is Gary Wilson.
Hey,
Well, Gary's right here. Gary, what about you in the late '70s there in New York?
when I graduated from high school, it was 1971, and back then you only had to be 18 to go into bars.
That's right,
and stuff.
18.
Right.
18.
Right.
But
That
even
was
in the 60s, I would go into
I had fake ID at
Fillmore
50,
East.
yeah.
But the 70s, I kind of watched the evolution. I mean, I went to see Iggy and the Stooges at Max's, and when he released Raw Power, I mean, I was watching it go from, I don't know what you call that, glam rock, with New York Dolls, and then it evolved. And I saw the New York Dolls maybe 3-4 times. I would go to New York to check them out, and you know, the Harlots of 42nd Street. That was kind of like the other band that was going on.
A little more on the glam side, which could maybe lead us to Kiss and your book with Kiss there, Robert. Of course, the book we're talking about today is Loudmouth, and down below you can order from Green Apple Books. But what about the Kiss deal? How come you never wound up in Kiss, Gary? You could have.
That would have been wonderful, really.
All right. What about your Kiss, Bob?
It would have been financially rewarding, but soul destroying.
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah. Well, you know, like I said, it was a funny time. I played my first gig at CBGB's was 1977, and
Okay.
I remember I waited in the bar there for Chris. What was it, Christie? Right, Christie Crystal or.
Crystal was like guy's last name.
Yes. So the bartender,
guy who owned it. Yeah.
Right. The bartender said, "Well, he'll be in a couple hours." So I waited.
Hilly Crystal.
Yeah, that's it. So, and I waited like 3 or 4 hours, and then finally he walked in, and it was like I just self-released. You Think You Really Know Me, 77, and I handed him the album, and I said, you know, I'd like to really play here. And he looked at the album, and he says, "Well, I'll put you on a Monday night and see how you make out." And yeah. And even then, though, it was a funny scene because sometimes the hardcore punk rock scene didn't like me because I would drag out like a Fender Rhodes piano, and you know, I had a certain musical thing that I appreciated. But anyways, make a long story short, I remember, like I said, seeing Iggy and the Stooges like in 72 or 3 at Max's close up, and that was great. I mean, and you know, I used to go to like New York to see Don Cherry, Pharoah Sanders, McCoy Tyner, you know, Keith Jarrett. I saw him like when I was 18 in a Village Vanguard. Charlie Hayden on
great
bass.
jazz players.
Yeah.
For those who don't know.
Robert, Trista Hamilton asked, "Hey, Robert, did you ever meet Farrah Fawcett?"
Well, that is a loaded question.
That's a good one.
You know, that's one of my great non-secrets. Yes, I did meet. I did much more than meet Farrah Fawcett. You want me to tell the Farrah Fawcett story? People like it, but one of my great childhood friends. He's still my friend. He was I tried to get this in the book in a fashion, but I thought, well, this isn't rock and roll. I can't put this in the book. The book's not all rock and roll, by the way. It's not. But one of my great childhood friends was a stage manager on Broadway. He followed in the footsteps of his father, was a stage manager, and he wound up stage managing for a big Liza Minnelli show called The Act, and things led to things, and they started going out, and they got married. And my friend was the one and only by her description, the one and only straight guy she married. And anyways, we had so what happened with this was Liza was a little older than us, but somebody's beeping me. But so when my friend turned 30, he was married to Liza, and he said to her, "Hey, I want you to give a Hollywood party, invite everybody you know in Hollywood." He was a guy that was just from a modest background, and all of us, his friends, were just kind of clowns and drunken dudes and rock and roll types. And so anyways, he had a party where he had everybody in Hollywood to us. Liza invited everybody in Hollywood to the party. So there's like Lucille Ball, and there's Gregory Peck, and there's De Niro and Scorsese, and at one point, speaking of which, I'm having a conversation near the front door with I'm talking to Harvey Keitel, the great actor, Scorsese movies and others, but I love Harvey. He was in Pulp Fiction. He plays, the guy who comes and cleans everything up. But anyways, it was me and Harvey Keitel and Meatloaf and Meatloaf's wife. And Meatloaf was, I guess, supposed to be on a diet, but he was scarfing hors d'oeuvres all night, and his wife kept hitting him on the hand and saying, I think his name is Marvin, saying, "Marvin, you're not supposed to do that," and blah, blah, blah. And at this point, I heard a knock at the door, and I went to the door, and nobody else seemed to hear it. I opened the door, and there's Gene Simmons from Kiss, speaking of Kiss. And Gene has it, I know Gene, but Gene doesn't know what to make of me. And so he just points at me like, "What the fuck are you doing here?" So, of course, I point back at him, and I'm like, "What the fuck are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, let me introduce you my date." And, of course, he didn't need to introduce her because it was Diana Ross with her big smile and her big hair, and they came in. Anyways, a lot of drinking went on. I got to meet Gregory Peck. Oh, shit. Al Pacino was there. I mistook Al Pacino. I thought somebody had brought their child. Al Pacino is so small and petite that I thought, wait, what the fuck? Somebody brought their child to this grown-up party. And as I got closer, I realized it was this guy was wearing all this stage makeup because he had just come from Broadway, and it was Al Pacino. But I thought he was a 14-year-old boy. But anyways, cut to a lot of drinking goes on, and cut to 5 a.m. And at the party was Farrah Fawcett and Ryan O'Neal, who was her paramour at the time, and he had been in Love Story. He was kind of big at the time, and Farrah Fawcett was huge. And Ryan, at one point during the party, I went into I was just kind of clowning around, and I went into one of the bedrooms, and there Ryan O'Neal was sitting with the largest mound of cocaine you've ever seen in your life. It was just really a giant mound. And I said to Ryan O'Neal, I said, "Hey, man, can I have some?" He says, "Sorry, man, don't have enough." And again, the largest pile of cocaine you've ever seen. So Ryan was all coked up. And so my friend, my friend who's married to Liza finally is like, "Hey, guys, you got to get out of here." It was just me and Ronnie Hoffman, my wife, and my friend Mark and Liza and Ryan and Farrah Fawcett. And he's like, finally 5:30, you got to get out. You always have to tell me to leave. So, cause I won't leave on my own. And so finally I'm like, all right, fuck it, I'll go. And I'm like, but I lost my jacket. So I'm parading around the house looking for my lost jacket. And it was really just a plain windbreaker. It was nothing, but I'm like yelling about who stole my jacket. And, I'm using it as an opportunity to clown further. And at some point after enough of this, Farrah Fawcett comes out of the bathroom, and she says, holds up this, dirty windbreaker and says, "Is this your jacket?" And I'm like, "Oh shit, you got my jacket." So I have to tell you that when I was a kid, I went to summer camp, and I took a junior life-saving class, and they taught you how to carry people that are much heavier than you through this leverage called the fireman's carry. Well, I adapted this when I started going to bars, that I would find the largest person in a bar and put them and go over and put them on my back and run around the bar with them. So that was my kind of, dog act. So in gratitude for Farrah Fawcett finding my jacket, I ran over and I grabbed her and I threw her up on my shoulder and ran around the house, hooting and hollering and celebrating that I been reunited with my jacket. And then, and now Ryan O'Neal is there, and he's kind of this officious cokehead, and Mark is saying, "Hey, come on, put her down, buddy, put her down." But that won't work. But Ryan is saying to Mark, "No, don't try to, don't rattle him," because I think Ryan thought I was going to jump out the window with her, because I was such a maniac in his kind of distorted view of the world at that point. And so that, how encouraging is that? So I run all around the apartment and on the marble floors and all this stuff, and I ran back by where Liza was standing, and I threw Liza up on my other shoulder. So at this point, I have Farrah Fawcett in her little brown micro skirt. She weighed about 70 pounds. And I have Liza Minnelli, who didn't weigh a lot, but weighed more than that. And I'm running around and I'm jumping and I'm dancing and I'm jumping over stuff. And Ryan O'Neal, Captain Emergency here, is going to try to use psychology to talk me down. And eventually I just, deposited both of them back where I found them and left for the night. And so if you want to know, do I know Farrah Fawcett? I've carried her around on my shoulders. And let me tell you, the postscript on that is, it's I know it's a favorite story, but the postscript is, I went a month or 6 weeks later. I went to there was a dinner party at a restaurant on the Upper East Side. I mean, a casual restaurant, and about 10, 12 people, and we were one of them. And all the seats are full at our little table. Liza and Mark were there, and except for the two opposite us, and Farrah Fawcett and Ryan O'Neal arrived at the last minute, and the only place for Farrah to sit was opposite me. So I said, "Oh, hey, Farrah, remember me?" And she said, "Yes." And that was it. Never talked to me again.
What year was the party?
Oh, this would have been like early 80s.
Okay. We've got
81.
Who said, "Whoops, that's the wrong one." We have a Facebook user says, "I can't wait to read this book." What book is that, Kat?
That would be Loudmouth by Robert Duncan, his debut novel.
That's right.
Talking about the time of the coming of age in the rock and roll era. We've talked about the Beatles, where Robert actually went and saw the Beatles at Shea Stadium.
Yeah.
You also worked as a managing editor for Cream magazine, and a lot of that is recounted in here, including after Cream writing this book about Kiss. And
we also have Gary Wilson with us too, so it's
Gary Wilson.
It's a very festive night to launch.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Hey, Gary. Yes, I did. I wrote a book about Kiss. I had written when I left Cream. I went to New York, and it was amazing how much entree working at Cream got you. So I was offered a lot of work. Of course, it paid shit, and but I recognized that if you wrote a story about Kiss, or if you wanted to write a story about Kiss, you could get an assignment. You called. So I was writing for every rock magazine there was, and I would write a negative. I decided this was my kind of shtick. I would write a negative article about Kiss one week in this magazine, and the next week I would write a positive article, but way over the top positive, in another magazine. And I would, and that's how we paid the rent. Well, that and selling, illegally selling promo records that we got from the record companies. But anyways, one day I'm at a press party for Ozzy Osbourne in New York, and you would always go to press parties because you're a broke-ass writer and you wanted to get free food and free beer. And so I went to the press party, and this guy Richard Robinson, wonderful guy, writer for Cream and also a producer, produced Lou Reed's first solo album. And he said, "Hey, there's a guy looking for a book about Kiss. You want here's his number." And I called the guy and made a deal, and And I had interviewed them a bunch. I mean, one of the first interviews I ever did was of Kiss. And then I went out to dinner. I went out to dinner with the manager, and then we went to the show. And we went to the show, and I'm like, what is this shit? Because they had their, they were the opening act, but they had their big Kiss sign, and I know this is this heresy to all the Kiss fans who've been interested in Loudmouth. Sorry, guys, but anyways, it was just I was just horrified. But anyways, that was one of the first stories I ever wrote. I'm not sure it ever got published because I probably just slagged them off so hard. But anyways, yes. And so I wound up writing this book it wound up selling a bunch of copies, which kind of carried us for a few years, Ronnie and I.
Cool.
Very good.
All right.
Very good. So we got Kiss in there. Gary, you should have been with Kiss. I swear, we would.
Well, I was from upstate. I was from Endicott, New York, upstate. So,
Right.
And they were from Long Island, and yeah, I would have been fun to have seen them in a small environment, I guess, right? A small club.
Even by the time I saw them, it was at Winterland in San Francisco, which is a huge place. It's where the Sex Pistols played their last show. But and anyways, I so they were kind of groomed for arenas from the beginning.
Yeah, they were right. They're like Grand Funk Railroad. Remember, they sold out.
Exactly, sold out
Shea Stadium like the Beatles.
Arena Rock. Those two, they were the anti-punks. They were Arena Rock guys from right off.
Yeah.
They all started in garages, I'm sure. Loudmouth is the novel. So what do we have here?
And if you buy today, we'll give you the undercoat for only $300.
Okay, that's a deal.
Loudmouth is it's odd you say Loudmouth is a novel, but you've lived all these great stories in real life. How much of Loudmouth is true, and what made you decide to make it a novel?
Well, as I've said, lots of it is factual. All of it's the truth. But why I made it a novel instead of a memoir? I mean, aren't all debut novels kind of memoir-y and autobiographical? But I would through a great accident, I just started writing. I had no plan when I started writing the book, and I was just writing along. And eventually, I said, "What is all this shit I'm writing?" Because I was just writing obsessively, and I thought, well, if you took this out and took this out, maybe it would be a book. At least it would be, related short stories, or it would be a memoir. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll try to make it a continuous prose, a book. And I wasn't sure if it was nonfiction or fiction at the time. And I started writing it kind of what actually happened to me. And I realized, oh shit, I don't want to write that. That's boring. And the other stuff was stuff I couldn't remember because, we were drinking so much. We were wild kids. And so I'm like, okay, fuck it. I'm going to make this a novel. I don't want to bore myself by writing down all the, I moved from here to here and this and that happened. Plus it gave me a tiny little fig leaf on all the friends and family who may be slightly irritated might have been slightly irritated to find themselves depicted in a memoir. And I couldn't vouch for my memory either. But so, and when I went around trying to sell the manuscript, there wasn't an editor who didn't say to me, why don't you just make this a memoir? Because apparently memoirs are easier to market. And I'm like, well, it's not really a memoir. Seems like a memoir, and maybe that's a tribute to my artistry that everybody thinks it's a memoir, because it's not really.
Yes. We got a question here. Why don't we ask Gary, and also for both of you? It says for both of you, what was the worst show you ever saw? So Gary, we're gonna let you go with that one, and then we'll bring up Robert and ask him. So what
Yeah.
was the show?
Morgan Gear.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't like to criticize other bands too much.
Well, that's a nice take, but I mean, you had to have one you didn't like because you just didn't like the performer, you know, or something. You know, maybe Engelbert Humperdinck. I don't know. You know, somebody like.
I'd have to contemplate that really. I've
Okay,
seen a
well,
lot.
we'll bring you back.
Okay.
Bring up Bob. Bob, what do you?
Well, I think or Morgan, thanks for your question. Morgan is a wonderful musician out of Asheville, North Carolina. Plays under the name Drunken Prayer. We love Morgan. He played here in San Francisco. We did an outdoor concert.
All right.
But Morgan, I'm really glad you asked that question because I think I answered it already by saying, you know, when I went to see Kiss the first time doing that interview, I thought, okay, this is the end of rock and roll as we know it. This is, you know, packaged, theatrical, but not theatrical in the Alice Cooper way. And that was, it just seemed overly packaged and with the big light up sign and too much planning. I kind of felt that I always felt and still do that the rock and roll should imbue and derive from a sense of abandon. I mean, you know, Little Richard to me is the emblem of all that, you know, this maniac with the crazy hair. And so I think that's why I love, one of the reasons I love Gary is because he has crazy hair. So I would have to say I would go for Kiss, but for those reasons.
That's good enough. Let's see if we have another question. Somebody else says, I can't wait to read this book. Michael Goldberg, you can buy it right there at Green Apple Books or any indie bookstore in your town. So,
Michael, yeah.
Too. So,
is that a friend who was there? Michael Goldberg?
Michael Goldberg is, I have to say, when I wrote a book called The Noise. Before this book, I wrote 4 other books, if you count the ghostwriting thing I did about soccer, of all things. But I did 3 other nonfiction books about music. And one of them was called The Noise, Music and Culture. And one of them was called The Noise. And it was, you know, it was my attempt to be serious. You know, I spent several years working on it. It was a very painful process, and you know, I went broke doing the book. I had an advance, but I had long ago spent the advance by the time I turned in the book, and I wound up getting a job at a bank. And so I was, but that's when we moved out to San Francisco. But I was feeling pretty low, but at lunch every day, I would eat my peanut butter and jelly sandwich in my cubicle at the bank. I was a copywriter in a marketing department, in an obscure marketing department within the bank, and I would eat my peanut butter and jelly sandwich that my wife had fixed for me the night before, and I would read rock magazines. I would go down to the lobby, and I would there was a little news kiosk, and I would get, you know, whatever rock magazine. Well, one day there was a new Rolling Stone. So I got Rolling Stone and I opened it up, and, you know, about 5 pages in, I almost shit my peanut butter and jelly sandwich because I saw the picture of the cover of my book, and there was a review in Rolling Stone of my book. And I just assumed it was going to be savaged, because I couldn't even bring myself to read that book. But it was a wonderful, positive, just glowing review. It made all the 3 years of pain and brokenness worth it. And it was written by Michael Goldberg.
All right. Okay.
Who I didn't know, but I sought him out and I tried to marry him.
Yeah.
All right. We've got another question. What do we have? Paul Johnson, wondering if your mom has read the book and what she thinks.
Well, I know he's needling me, but I would say to everybody in this audience, don't ever fucking tell my mom about this book. Yeah, I never told her about it. I've been working on this book for like 5 or 6 years, and
She's
and my mother, by the way, who is 98 years old. How about that? And but still,
watching you right now, Bob.
I sure hope not. But she doesn't hear very well or see very well, so I'm counting on that working in my favor. But I would implore everybody in the audience to not tell her, because not that she's the mother figure in the book, not at all, of course not. But she might take it wrong. But she for years she's bugged me. When are you going to finish that book? When are you going to finish that book? And up until like 2 weeks ago, I was telling her, I'm still working on it. And she said, well, maybe you ought to show it to somebody who can help you finish it. And in the meantime, it was done. But and then 2 turncoats in her community said, hey, I've heard from 2 people that you have a book out. And I said, well, it's not actually out. It's in galleys, but it'll be out soon. So don't tell my mother, please.
We will not tell your mom. This is the book, Loudmouth. And you can get a copy right below here at this link at Green Apple Books in San Francisco at 506 Clement Street in the Richmond district. Anyhow, Gary, I wanted to ask you about I like this title. I wish it's not your album name, but now during the pandemic, I think it's very good. You were on the Jimmy Kimmel with Earl Sweatshirt and Bad Not Good, and they sampled your song You Were Too Good to Be True on an album called I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. So this is for us in the pandemic now, right? That's one of my favorites. So how did you enjoy doing Jimmy Kimmel?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that show. I took a train up from San Diego, and I got off the train, and it was like right in the heart of Hollywood, really, where that's shot. And I got there, and they were waiting for me to see the camera positions and so forth. And so finally they got that taken care of. Then everybody went down to Earl Sweatshirt's dressing room down there, and and he's on a major label, so they were going way out, with him. So I snuck out to another where nobody was, into a small dressing room, and they didn't know what I was going to do anyway. Earl said to me, he said, Gary, do whatever you want. And so, I decided to wrap my head in duct tape while I'm up there. So, so I had a great time. I had a real fun time, I remember.
And Earl Sweatshirt is, I love that Gary, generations keep catching on to him. And Earl Sweatshirt is really one of the great, hip hop guys around. That's so cool that he picked up on Gary. And he's a young guy. So
I remember. That whole thing with I remember with oh gosh, no, I forgot what I was. Yeah. Okay.
But Gary was also on Jimmy Fallon.
Yes.
Questlove on Jimmy Fallon is a huge fan of Gary Wilson.
All right.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. So
yeah, that was another. That was a good time. I had a good time there too. He's Questlove. He like pretty much leads the band and everything, and we all piled into the dressing room like a half hour before we were going to go on TV, and and he had the songs all laid out on a computer, and then each musician would match up to the song on the computer. And so it was great. It was great having the Roots. You can't go wrong with Questlove and the Roots.
They're playing a Gary song, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We got another here for Bob. So we'll put you up on the bigger screen, Bob. Who was the hardest, worst person you ever interviewed? So what do you think about that?
Well, thank you, Mo. Thank you for that thoughtful question. It's a big contest for who's the worst. I mean, One time I went at the peak of their fame before they kind of flamed out and then came back, which was astonishing to me, was Aerosmith. So I had to go interview Joe Perry and Steven Tyler, and they were staying at the Plaza Hotel, which is, grand old hotel. And they were in a big suite there. And I went in and started talking to them. And these guys, as often as happened, enough times, they were so high, so fucked up that it was like, what the fuck? You'd ask them questions and they would, they didn't even tell you about Farrah Fawcett. They weren't going off on tangents. They would kind of drift off. So I would say that was hard and worse and worst, but I've always said that the worst interview, and here I think I wrote up the Aerosmith thing, but it's one of those things where you have to be inventive and you wind up turning an interview into a think piece. So you just write a bunch of bullshit, and because these guys were so dull, but the dullest ever I'm remembering now was there was a band. Again, you're a freelance writer, you got to pay your rent, and some magazine asked me to go interview this band Journey, and it was before Steve Perry, so it was an early edition of Journey, maybe right after their first record. Well, these guys were, and we went to a bar on the Upper East Side, and they were so kind of jaded and bitter, and these guys, a lot of the guys, Ainsley Dunbar was the drummer. Gary will remember that name.
Sure.
Famous. I think he was British. And but these guys had been around the music business so long, it was really not working for them to be a beginning act again. So that was it. That was an interview where it's like, okay, fuck it. I got home. I'm like, I can't write this. These guys sucked, and I'm just not going to do it. So, and that almost never happened because you needed the $50 to $100 you might get for a profile, but it was like I just couldn't do it. Journey killed my soul.
Wow. We are here for the West Coast launch and the premiere launch of Loudmouth by Robert Duncan, who's here with us.
Plus Undercoat.
And yes, right. and Gary Wilson. We're all here together, hanging out, and they're selling the books at Green Apple Books in San Francisco. Also, in every bookstore you might be able to drive by or go into with social distancing right now.
If they don't have it on the shelves, you can always request it.
You can request it, and you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, you name it, it's out there. Loudmouth. So, what do we got here?
Well, we do have the book Loudmouth, kind of after winding through this crazy upbringing and these madcap times in Greenwich Village and Detroit, then all of a sudden the real heroine of the book is you meet a girl. So can you tell us a bit about that, maybe to wrap up our evening here?
Well, yeah. One of my favorite stories, but in the book, Thomas Ransom, who kind of tracks with me, but again didn't do all the boring stuff. He's much more exciting. Meets a girl named Rebecca, and even I'm the fucking author, and I'm forgetting her last name, but Holtzman, Rebecca Holtzman, named. I stole the name from Elizabeth Holtzman, who used to be city council president in New York when I was there, and I once interviewed her for a book. But anyways, this guy has come back from Detroit, Thomas, and it tracks with my thing. And he had a girlfriend in New York, but he broke up with his girlfriend in New York, and he went out to a bar to meet his friends, because they're all going to commiserate and basically, excuse to get drunk. And so where I went to a bar called Jimmy Day's, which is about a block or two from the world headquarters of Three Rooms Press, the esteemed publisher. So Jimmy Days was like kind of a sports bar. Now I don't care about sports at all, but in those days, the Greenwich Village was the gay headquarters of the world. And so if you wanted to meet heterosexual girls, Jimmy Days was one of the few options to my viewpoint. So anyways, I'm in there getting drunk with some friends, and one of these guys says to me, and it happens to be, and I had to use this in the book because I loved it. He has a bull semen harvesting, farm in Pennsylvania, and he came down for a special occasion to get drunk with us. But I love that he's like, at one point I called him the cum farmer, but if I can be that gross. But anyways, he's saying to me, you gotta, what you need, you need a girl. You really need to get a girl. And I'm like, and in that way, when you're drunk and things seem wiser than they are, I thought that's brilliant. So I gazed out the window, the picture window in at Jimmy Days, and just at that moment, serendipitously, two girls, they were young women, were walking by. And so I said, damn it, you're right, my friend. And so I ran outside the door, and I found these women that I saw through the window appealing, and I grabbed the one that I found most appealing by the elbow. And, I'd probably get arrested today and put in jail, but, it was a gentle grab. It really was. And I was grabbing her where there was a bit of a sleeve. So I wasn't, grabbing skin, but I grabbed this girl and I'm saying, hey, come, hey, come have a drink or something. And she says, get your hands off me. So they keep marching on. And so now I'm like, I'm a never say die type. And I'm running backwards as they march forwards. And I ran backwards for a couple blocks. And I'm just like, fuck it. Yeah, I'm going to make this happen. I'm saying, well, come on, let me buy you a drink, girls, blah, blah, blah. Where are you going? Where are you going? And finally, one of the girls, the girl I had grabbed, broke down and said, we're going to the Bottom Line. Now, the Bottom Line was a famous club in New York, at the time. Everybody, it was kind of a record biz showcase. Like Bruce Springsteen played his first gig after writing Born to Run there, that kind of thing. So I said, she said, we're going to the Bottom Line. I said, well, who you going to see? And, I knew everybody in the music business at this point because I had worked at Cream. And finally, I'm walking backwards, and finally she says, Elliot Murphy. And I'm thinking, Elliot Murphy was one of the original new, after Dylan kind of had been around long enough, they started anointing people as new Dylans. And Elliot Murphy was one of them. And he was pretty good. He's still around. So she was going to see Elliot Murphy, and I'm like, oh, man. Okay. Not only did I know who Elliot Murphy was, but I knew his publicist. So I said to the girls, I said, hey, I can get you in free. And so this girl they were, really quite assiduously ignoring me. She said, well, we're already getting in free. I was like, oh no. Well, I'm like, oh, how are you getting in free? Why are you getting in free? And so she pointed to her friend, and her friend was this little woman, muscle-bound woman. She was like a weightlifter. She was in weightlifting competitions, and she had just gotten her whole forearm etched with a phoenix tattoo. And at this time, tattooing was actually illegal in New York City. You couldn't practice tattooing, so you had to go to a underground tattooist. Anyways, but she points to this other woman, her tough friend, her scary tough friend, and says, well, she's a singer. She's Helen Wheels. And she said, I'm a photographer. I said, you're a photographer. And I'm thinking, all right, well, whatever. I got to take a shot at this, right? I said, well, because I knew some photographers, and she said, I said, what's your name? And she said, Ronnie Hoffman. And I said, Ronnie Hoffman, I'm Duncan from Cream. I sent you a check last week because at the time I was managing editor and I was signing all the I was sending out the editorial checks. Heaven forfend they ever let me sign a check. But I said, I'm Duncan. I sent you a check last week. And so after, 20 minutes of walking backwards, I, got to scoop the ladies up and we went back to the bar and had a bunch of drinks, and then the bull semen farmer went home with the we all went to Elliot Murphy, and I got thrown out and lots of things ensued, but I wound up back at Ronnie Hoffman's house, and the next morning, I don't mean to be shocking, these were the old days. My kids, I've already confessed this to my children. But the next morning we're awakened by a phone call, and it is a mutual friend, which is John Morthland, who's the guy who hired me as the copy boy at Cream. And John Morthland called to tell Ronnie that he said, this guy just came back to town from Detroit, Robert Duncan. I think you would really like him. And she said, he's right here.
That's the story right there. That's the story.
So I stole that story for Thomas Ransom and Rebecca Holtzman in the book.
The book is Loudmouth by Robert Duncan. You just heard him, and we do have Gary Wilson with us too, who has
a new record.
Of 14 albums. I mean, come on.
And has
what
a new
guy.
record coming out.
You got a new one coming out?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on a new one.
Okay.
What was the latest record that came out?
Thank you all for being here.
Yeah,
this has been a lot of fun.
Tormented, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming, Gary.
Thank you so much for joining us, Gary. You were sweetheart. And here we are in New York. So we have Southern California, Northern California, and the East Coast.
We got the coast covered.
We got
and I see some old friends in the audience out there.
That's right. So be sure to pick up your copy of Loudmouth. Get it tonight. Get it tomorrow. Green Apple is open for business, so you can go in and browse books if you like, and you can get it from your local bookstore anywhere in the country. You can get it online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or bookshop.org. It's been a great pleasure having you here, and I'm so excited that Loudmouth is a great launch.
It's in the world. It's been born.
Out that champagne.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well.
So fantastic.
Champagne.
You know what? That Ronnie Hoffman that I met on, and I met her on Positively 4th Street, by the way.
That's correct.
Anyways, she's upstairs in my house right now because we've been married for like many decades. We get
wonderful. What a story.
I will drink this with the woman whose arm I grabbed. In a little bit. Hi, Ronnie. She's a
beautiful.
We're going to jump off the live stream, but you guys hang out for a second. Don't go.
Thanks, Gary. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody who came. And thank you to Green Apple.
Green Apple. Thank you very much, Green Apple. 506 Main Street in the district, San Francisco. So we're going unlive.